To the segment of this show called the Roundup Wrap, where we invite our resident analyst, Mighti Jamie, to talk to us about some of the stories highlighted earlier, as well as throw forward to the week ahead. Good morning, Jamie. How are you?
Good morning to you. I'm doing good. Good morning. Good to see you.
Great, and hoping that the weekend was also fabulous. Or it was...
It was a bit busy.
Yeah, it was.
It was, yeah, because my high school kids that I coach are doing debate competitions. So the weekend, they were debating all weekend. So basically 8 to 6 p.m. days over the weekend.
Awesome. That's great. And I'm sure they had a lot to gather in terms of information and stories that are making headlines. So I'm sure that was fun for you. Great to hear that. So today, let's start with Chad. The former Prime Minister in Chad and opposition leader Sukse Masra has been arrested at his home in Gussie. We saw surveillance footage showing the leader of the Transformers political party being taken away by a squad of armed men. What is he being accused of?
Well, he's being accused of, basically causing insurrection in one region of the country or instigating violence in one region of the country. It seems to me, though, that part of this is just about the consolidation of power by the son of, Idris Deby, who used to be the president until he died. So now we've got Muhammad Deby, who's in power, who power over a military council, recently won a presidential election. Masra was his former prime minister. He's an opposition leader. He was the main challenger, So in the southern region, there are ethnic tensions. There are people with a lot of grievances because development in the country is low. The human development index of the country is low. So there are a variety of what I would call ground-based issues. But what we are seeing now is that because there are tensions, the basically president right now is using a heavy hand to try to then send a message to, I guess, all of the other ethnicities that he's not going to be tolerating any dissent. He's not going to be tolerating any pushback. This reminds me in many ways of what happened in the early 80s in Zimbabwe, where we saw that the ZANU-PF leadership of Robert Mugabe pushed back against the leadership of ZAPU and then basically, unleashed a reign of terror on ethnicities that were not predominantly Shona, and in so doing perpetrated what was considered to be a genocide at the time. And this is what it seems is happening in this particular instance as well. You've got a military dictatorship. You've got a family that has been in power for a very long time, controlling the levers of the state. You've got this challenger who is viewed by many to actually be the future president, and even the legitimate voice of the people, now being accused of instigating violence in a region where his ethnicity is based.
Sukse Masra's party has said that he had been kidnapped and demanded that he becomes released unconditionally. How true is that?
Well, I mean, politicians sometimes use this language loosely, to basically, because he's taken by government officials, he's taken by the police. So it's not necessarily kidnapped, he's arrested. But what they're trying to say is that the nature of his arrest and the political nature of his arrest is such that you could consider it to be akin to kidnapping, I think I once saw ministers saying that they were held hostage by union members who didn't want them to leave a meeting. And then they started saying we're being held hostage. It was romantic language, but probably misused in this particular case. We've seen even with the Trump administration, people being taken by officials in ways that they said wasn't in line with due process, but not quite something that we would compare to kidnapping, because there's no request for a ransom or anything like that. But it is a form of dictatorial suppression. It is a form of intimidation of political rivals. And it does indicate right now that there's no democracy in Chad. This is basically the long and short of the story. How the international community will respond is something that is going to be interesting as well, because we're in a period now where there is almost a renegotiation of the African political order. We've seen this alliance of Sahel states We've seen various other, groupings try to, impose their will, so to speak, on the direction of Africa. So the question then will be, with all of this happening, where is, the Deby family aligned to in this particular geopolitical moment? And will we see regional pushback to this arrest? Because the arrest of an opposition leader is something that is very significant in a country, and we don't see this in democracies. We don't see this in developed nations. We don't see this in nations that uphold human rights. So the fact that it's happening to arrest a former prime minister, it's not a joke. It's a very serious thing. So how the international community responds will be something that we have to look out for. And then that will give us an indication of, for instance, is the UN Security Council going to issue a statement? Are we going to see the African Union issue a statement? What's going to happen? Is the Trump administration going to get involved? Where do things stand? It's a serious issue. It's a sensitive issue, but we're seeing a dictator here consolidating power under the pretext of dealing with, insurrection.
Let's go to Libya now. Prime Minister in Libya, Abdullah Hamid al-Dibeba, said on Saturday that eliminating militias is an ongoing process or project as a ceasefire after deadly clashes remained in place. So Dibeba is the country's internationally recognized leader in the West, based in Tripoli. Let's talk about that he ordered the armed groups to be dismantled. Firstly, what do we know about fatalities and injuries from the clashes, and why this move, do you think?
Well, it's difficult to ascertain the exact numbers in a country like Libya right now because it's a war zone and journalists are not able to gather the data in the way that we sometimes have data coming from Gaza, coming from even Ukraine, because there that data is being compiled by the Ministry of Health in Gaza or the Department of Health there and by the Ukrainian government as well. So we'll probably get a clearer picture as to what is the consequence of all of these clashes that have happened between these two rival groups, because as things stand right now, we have two different groupings who claim to be leading or who are effectively leading different regions. We've got Khalifa Haftar who's leading in the east, and then we've got the Tripoli-based GNU government, which is the internationally recognized one. But even that concept of who is internationally recognized is a loose concept because the United Nations has given status to the Tripoli-based government, but other countries are dealing with all of these entities, buying oil from them. We've got various countries which seem to be involved in what is happening in the country. We've got Turkey, we've got Egypt, we've got the UAE, we've got Russia, so there are a variety of players here. Donald Trump has a strong relationship with the leader of Turkey, and that may influence things in terms of how he begins to view this, because if we all go back to when Libya got into this current status, this was because of that 2011 overthrow of Muammar Gaddafi, and the US and the French were involved. So at some point, if there's going to be a real return to peace or removal of guns in Libya, will have to get the involvement of those entities who broke Libya in the first place. Because one of the biggest things is after the no-fly zone, after all of that was done and Gaddafi was removed, these international actors moved on quite quickly and didn't support the rebuilding and the peace process that needed to be implemented. And that's why we saw vacuums of power, and we've seen basically for the last 14 years, Libya being in various states of war. And it's a crisis, I think, that was a product of international actors thinking that they understood the needs and the dynamics of a particular country, trying to teach Gaddafi a lesson and trying to remove him as a player in the name of this Arab Spring, which they said was going to be this wave of democracy. Looking back on all of this, there's a real concern about how everything played out, because right now, if you look at all of the countries where the Arab Spring was supposed to really have happened, you look at Tunisia, you look at Egypt, you look at Libya as the three African countries. Libya is a war zone. Tunisia is being run by a dictator, and there's a military regime in Egypt. So looking back at that international involvement and having started applying my mind to African issues around about that time, I'm really skeptical of how the international community, one, intervened in Africa, two, destabilized that region, and having Libya being basically a country with no real internal security, having militias, that contributed to the immigration issue that we've seen in Europe, because a lot of people who are aspiring to go to Europe and seeking a better outcome in Europe actually were going through Libya and then finding their way to countries like Turkey, finding their way to Greece, etc., and then trying to reach France, trying to reach the United Kingdom. All of that has led to increased xenophobia, increased Afrophobia even, and we've seen how that rhetoric has now been shaping European politics as well. For me, it all goes back to the Arab Spring, all goes back to this critical moment when, Muammar Gaddafi was shot and killed like a dog on the streets, in something where it was orchestrated by the French, by the Americans, and really damaged Africa and Africa's growth trajectory. We definitely lost somebody who was passionate about Africa, and that involvement, I think, damages the credibility of people like Hillary Clinton and the legacies of people like even Barack Obama. Unfortunately, even though he's given credit in other areas, Libya is one of his biggest failures as an international leader, and we're continuing to see the consequences of that. So whether or not there will be success going forward, it's an open-ended question, really, because this country has been at war basically since 2011.
Let's come to our shores now. South Africa. The President Cyril Ramaphosa is to head to the U.S. this week for a meeting with his U.S. counterpart, President Donald Trump. What do you make of the timing of this meeting, firstly?
Well, it's the timing is quite opportune, I think, because there may be an opportunity for President Ramaphosa to fix some of the challenges that have developed in the relationship between South Africa and the USA because of the activities, I think, primarily of Elon Musk. And if you've been looking on social media, there has been a preponderance and an exponential increase in the activity of anonymous accounts, which seem to be boosted by Elon Musk. And there's been a preponderance of Elon Musk sharing fake information and false news about South Africa. He has been participating in a massive disinformation campaign. And I think what he's trying to do is to unravel the prospects of success of this particular meeting, and maybe trying to reach Trump through social media, because maybe those things are also showing up on Trump's phone when he goes through social media, if he does at all. Because if we've been following the story, we know that as soon as Trump came in, he canceled the refugee program, he canceled US aid programs. That funding had a massive impact on South Africa, because 20% of South Africa's HIV funding for PEPFAR was coming from the USA. So this has a direct impact on South African health delivery. Real people are likely going to die as a result of Elon Musk's actions. He seems to be frustrated because of, not being able to get Starlink to operate in South Africa, which is something that he wanted to do. He then withdrew their application for a license from ICASA. So as things stand, we've seen Trump and Elon being side to side, almost like bros, and their bromance basically for the last 4 months, the world was watching it. But it seems as if South Africa was a unique target for them. And if President Ramaphosa can establish rapport with Donald Trump, he is somebody who is very charming, somebody who is very effective at being able to manage conversations with various actors. We saw that in the CODESA negotiations in the early 90s. We've seen that even with him being in the government of national unity. He's going with John Steenhuisen, the leader of the Democratic Alliance, to, I think, try to show President Trump that, listen, I'm here with an Afrikaner. There's no discrimination of Afrikaners. There's no genocide. The narrative of genocide, every time we have to say this, is a massive lie being perpetrated by people who are trying to destroy the reputation and standing of South Africa. And they know that South Africa is having a tough reception on the global stage, particularly on the American stage, because of its relationships with China, its relationships with Russia, and the fact that it took Israel to the ICJ. So those type of things definitely caused friction with the Americans, caused friction with the Israelis, and we know that Israel and America have a close relationship. So some people have now been trying to exploit those tensions for their benefits, for their political ends, and I think that Elon Musk has been doing that. So if President Ramaphosa can actually navigate this moment, I think it will be something that cements his legacy as a negotiator. Many people are wondering if it's going to be like a Zelensky discussion. I don't think it will be, because Mr. Ramaphosa is not the type of person to interject and cut off somebody, and is quite used to speaking with global players and leaders on the international stage. Just a few months ago, he was having a conversation with Ursula von der Leyen. He's had conversations with all of the G7 leaders multiple times. So I think also he probably has done some preparatory legwork and will have something that he can negotiate with Mr. Trump. 600 American businesses operate in South Africa, Google, Microsoft, and several others. So I think there are interests here for the Americans to protect, and Trump is looking for a deal. I don't think he's looking to destroy the reputation and standing of the leader of the largest economy in Africa, and the most industrialized economy in Africa, because if he does that, that sends a message to the other 54 countries that go to China, go to Russia, forget about doing business with the Americans, something he doesn't want to do at this point.
Well, we'll leave it there for today. It's going to be quite an interesting week, quite a number of news
going to be a
items
movie.
to follow. Exactly. A lot of stories to follow up on. But thank you so much. And I love what you do with the kids and the debating. So have a great week.
Thanks so much. Have a great one too.
Thank you. That's Mighti Jamie, a resident analyst for our Roundup Wrap. It's quite an interesting week, this one. The news...